As a storm rages around them, two hikers struggle to make their way out of the remote wilderness area of Crested Butte, Colorado. As darkness begins to settle in, the hikers realize they must camp for the night. Later that night, something invades their camp. What did the hikers see that night? Was it a bear looking for food, or was it something much more mysterious? Could they have seen the legendary beast called Bigfoot?
For thousands of years, there have been reports of huge hairy beasts from various parts of the world. Some of these animals have been very human-like in shape, but are not human because of their stature, the way they move, and their huge size. What they are remains a mystery.
In this modern age of big city and urban sprawl, it's difficult for people to believe that vast wilderness areas still do exist. Many of these remote areas are virtually untouched by man. With this in mind, it's not difficult to believe that a creature could exist and could have gone undetected for all these years.
Thousands of strange footprints and eyewitness sightings have added to the mystery of this legendary beast. But are these genuine clues that point to the existence of a monster? Or are they simply fabrications that have provided unscrupulous people with the means of perpetrating an elaborate hoax? We'll begin our search for answers in just a moment. Among Native Americans, there is an ancient legend that has been handed down through many generations. It speaks of a race of giant creatures that the Indians call Sasquatch, which translated means hairy man. But to most of us, the creature is known simply as Bigfoot.
In the late 19th century, when white settlers were arriving in the far west, they encountered Native Americans who had stories of huge man-like creatures who lived in the mountains. The Native people were afraid of these animals, or creatures, because they apparently came down and stole women and children as they slept. In April of 1840, Reverend Elkanah Walker was working with the Spokane tribe, working as a missionary. He was concerned, however, because he found them to be rather superstitious. This was based on the stories he was hearing about huge human-like creatures which came down from the mountains, threw stones at the houses, had a terrible smell, and which were stealing salmon from the nets, which they ate raw. They also reported 1.5 foot long tracks.
Were the Indians merely being superstitious, or had they actually seen something in the woods? The details contained in Reverend Walker's letter are especially interesting when compared with the story of a Bigfoot encounter that happened 80 years later. One of the most famous stories of a Bigfoot encounter happened in the summer of 1924, when 5 men made a prospecting trip into the rugged forest near Mount St. Helens. Having seen large, unidentifiable tracks in the forest before, the men were on their guard, but nothing would prepare them for what was about to happen. The creature had been hit, perhaps even killed, but the miners didn't take the time to find out. Upon reaching their cabin, the men prepared for some much-needed rest. But Sasquatch had other plans. The men were under attack, and whatever was lurking in the darkness seemed to be out for revenge. The attacks continued throughout the night, with the prospectors using their guns to hold the attackers at bay. When morning finally came, the miners made their escape down the mountain. Frightened but thankful to be alive, the men told a local newspaper reporter that huge gorilla-like animals had attacked them. The creatures, they said, were covered in long black hair, and the tracks they left behind were 14 inches long. Throughout their lives, the miners never wavered from their harrowing tale. But is this story true? If so, what kind of animal would be capable of carrying out such an attack?
There are many thousands of reports of people who claim to have seen the Sasquatches. Most of these are very consistent, and I'm inclined to believe that people are seeing a perfectly real wild animal. Sasquatch appears to be a bipedal animal walking on two legs in a human manner, but with the body usually tilted a little forward at the hips. The body size ranges from about 6 to perhaps 9 feet in height. Body weight of an adult is anywhere from 500 to 800 pounds or a little bit more. The Sasquatch is always described as being covered with hair, perhaps 2 to 4 inches long. Color is usually very dark brown or black, and very rarely reddish or other lighter colors have been reported. The appearance of the arms hanging down to the knees is not because the arms are any longer down, but the way it walks, raising its knees very high. There are a few interesting things about the Sasquatch face. It's more human than ape in the sense that the mouth does not protrude like a gorilla. The nose is relatively flat and wide. The brow ridges are very prominent, and above that the forehead is very retreating, and that's an ape-like characteristic. What's also interesting is that if I stand or hold myself in a normal posture, my mouth and chin are above the level of my shoulders. That's a standard human. Apes, however, have the shoulders up like this, and the mouth is below the level of the shoulders. The same is true of the Sasquatch. So if a Sasquatch wants to turn his head, he can only go so far before he runs into his shoulders. And like the apes, they either tip their head back to look, or they twist the entire body to look. A lot of the eyewitness reports often include a description of an extremely foul odor that's associated with them. And on rare instances, there is a description of an extremely loud, screaming, howling sound that they make.
Part of the problem we've had in proving that this creature is real is that scientists are confronted with a description of a creature which does not line up with any of the known North American game animals or big game animals. What it does line up with is great apes or humans, or even worse, something in between, and scientists as a rule have been very unwilling to entertain this possibility. I think the discovery, the irrefutable proof when we get it of Sasquatch or Bigfoot, will be a huge victory for the common man, and it will be a source of, I hope it will be a source of embarrassment for scientists. Because scientists, I would say they've dropped the ball on this. You know, people have been reporting these things. I know my biologist colleagues have not treated these people very well. I feel very badly for people who have these reports, who've seen these things. They may be experienced bear hunters, and they can't be listened to. They've been ridiculed, and it's just been a very, very bad situation. And it disturbs me that, you know, most people look to scientists for explanations. The common explanation from scientists is that they're misidentified bears or hoaxes or that sort of thing. They haven't considered the possibility of a real animal. Most scientists haven't. The lay people who have seen the evidence often have not documented it or recorded it. It's not their job. So a lot of evidence is not being well recorded and documented. And that distresses me. It's because scientists have told people, no, this is just a joke or a hoax, forget it. People have done that. So I think it's really going to change things in how we look at science. We're going to recognize that science isn't filled with curiosity the way we all used to think. It's filled with a large amount of closed-mindedness, and we might as well know that and sort of get on with it.
You know, just because the Sasquatch sounds like a very unusual, unexpected, and unreal animal, that should not constitute any solid evidence against it. Just imagine you describe to someone who's never heard of the animal a creature that stands maybe 16 feet tall. Half of that is neck, and you get a little incredulous response. Then you add, just for good measure, that it's got two fur-covered horns on the top of its head, round balls on the tips, and you've lost all credibility. But that's just what a giraffe looks like. Now, imagine trying to tell the same skeptic about an elephant.
There are plenty of examples of people who have discovered unknown species of animals. They've been laughed at and even called frauds. A perfect example of that is the duck-billed platypus when it was brought back from Australia. And the scientists, even though they had a carcass right in front of them, they thought it was a fake. They couldn't believe their eyes. It was just too fantastic to be true.
If the creature we call Bigfoot really does exist, is it a monster, as some have said, or an unidentified animal that means us no harm? Listen to the eyewitness account of a man named Billy Riley, and you be the judge.
I was just a teenager the night I came face to face with Bigfoot, and it changed my life forever. It was the summer of 1972. My friend and I had gone to his girlfriend's house just outside of town. It turned out to be pretty boring. At least I thought so. So I left him there, and I just started walking back down the main road to the highway. I could hear the cows out across the field. They were carrying on so much, I looked over to see what was happening. I saw what I figured to be a farmer chasing the cows, and I thought that was strange, it being so late in the evening. Then I heard a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before in my life. And I suddenly realized that's no farmer. I could hardly believe my eyes. This huge thing was coming right at me. It must have been more than 10 feet tall, and it was covered with reddish-brown hair. I knew I had to get out of there as fast as I could, but I was in the middle of nowhere. The only thing around was this little farmhouse. I made it over the farmer's fence in a split second. I didn't even look back to see how close it was. I could smell it, this awful smell. I knew it was right behind me. The farmer's dogs were yelping and howling, and I'm pounding on the door. He finally came and looked out the window, and he was mad. As soon as he caught sight of the monster, his face went white with fear. He left me out there to fend for myself. There wasn't really much I could do. I curled up in a ball, and I prayed for a miracle. And then, just as quick as it came, it was gone. Back across the field, and I never saw it again. It was the most frightening experience of my life. And I found out later I wasn't the only one that had seen that creature in those woods. In fact, quite a few sightings had been reported about the same time and in the same location as my experience. Since then, I've started an organization called Bigfoot Busters, the idea being that if anybody has a sighting report of a Bigfoot anywhere, they can contact my organization and we will investigate the report. My ultimate goal is to provide undeniable, indisputable scientific proof that this thing really does exist.
Is it possible that the existence of Bigfoot can be proven, or are the eyewitness accounts simply part of a hoax designed to draw attention to the people who tell these stories? But what if the story came from a very credible source, such as the President of the United States?
Teddy Roosevelt was a frontiersman who really enjoyed the outdoors. Before he was president in 1901, he had worked on a number of ranches in the West. During this time, he met a man named Bauman who told him a story he never forgot. Bauman was a beaver trapper. When he and his partner were trapping in a remote area of Idaho, they were attacked, apparently, by a large animal walking on 2 feet with a terrible smell and a loud howl. In addition, their lean-to was wrecked at least twice while they were out trapping. When they were attacked finally one night, they decided they should leave. But before they could get the traps all picked up and leave, the partner was actually killed with a broken neck. Apparently the story made quite an impression on Roosevelt because he chose to include it in his travel book of Western adventures. He was very impressed because apparently Bauman was quite shaken as he was telling the story, which he recalled.
Is it possible that the trapper lied about his experience? Teddy Roosevelt didn't think so. And what about Billy Riley? If his story is a fraud, Why would he devote his life to proving the existence of something he never saw? And finally, were the miners on Mount St. Helens lying about the attack on their cabin? Till the day they died, none of the men ever recanted their story, despite experiencing the usual disbelief that comes with a Bigfoot sighting. Do these compelling eyewitness accounts mean that these people actually saw the elusive beast called Bigfoot? Or were their attackers all too human? The surprising answers are up next. Is Bigfoot just a legend, or is it a real creature? People have been debating that question for a very long time. But for those who have had a first-hand encounter, there is no doubt.
Several years ago, on the 4th of July, my sons and I went on a hike near our home in Utah. We came to a gully, and there was a strong, awful odor. As I looked around, something dark caught my eye in an aspen grove. I thought to myself, this must be the owner of the land that we're hiking on. But I wondered to myself, why is he wearing a black fur hat, a long fur coat, gloves, and boots on the 4th of July? And then it hit me. His size was about 14 feet tall, and it was so frightening that I picked up my youngest son under my arm and began to run. And I told my other sons, run to the car and don't look back. When we arrived home, my youngest, who wasn't quite 5 at the time, was trembling and ill. And I hadn't noticed in my confusion that I had picked him up facing backwards, and he had seen the creature, and he said it followed us and that it was a mommy.
A fair number of Sasquatch reports could be in error because somebody saw an oddly shaped tree trunk or formation of rocks, or a standing bear. And if they didn't notice the protruding muzzle, the narrow shoulders, and the short legs, that may have struck them as a Sasquatch. But on the other hand, someone could have seen an actual Sasquatch and assumed it was a standing bear.
There's no doubt in my mind that a number of the reported Bigfoot sightings, perhaps even the majority, are hoaxes or misidentifications. But there still remains a number of encounters that cannot be explained away so easily. This leaves us with the possibility that there is still something out there that we have yet to find.
What did these people actually see? Was it the legendary Bigfoot, the same creature that attacked the prospecting party on Mount St. Helens in 1924? Or did their eyes deceive them? Is it possible that the creature doesn't exist at all? The president of the American Board of Forensic Anthropology had this to say about Bigfoot. Either the most complex and sophisticated hoax in the history of anthropology has continued for centuries without being exposed, or the most man-like and non-human primate on Earth has managed to survive in parts of North America and remains undiscovered by modern science. If the monster we call Bigfoot actually exists, is it only in North America? Interestingly enough, Bigfoot-like creatures have been reported around the world. In the Himalayas, the Sherpa people accept as fact the existence of a creature they call the Yeti. We know it as the abominable snowman. In China and Russia, a creature called the Almas that fits the general description of Bigfoot has been reported for centuries. Perhaps it's because of these legends that modern man is so willing to believe in the story of Bigfoot, even when the purported evidence turns out to be a hoax.
One of the earliest documented Bigfoot encounters was in British Columbia in the 1880s, when people on a train saw an immature Sasquatch on some rocks. They pursued it, knocked it unconscious, captured it, and took it in a baggage car to a cage where they displayed it in the nearest town. They called it Jacko. The creature was described as something of a gorilla type. It stood about 4.5 feet high, weighed 127 pounds, and was covered with long black hair. Based on this description, people thought that maybe this was indeed a young Sasquatch. But that's where the story becomes confused. Even though a description of the beast was included in the newspaper, there were no photographs and no published reports of anyone in the town ever actually having seen Jacko. Several theories have since been put forth to explain this. First, Jacko might have been shipped off to become a sideshow attraction in England. It's also possible that the showman P.T. Barnum acquired the creature, because about this time, Barnum began to exploit a very popular sideshow which he called Jojo the Dog-Faced Boy. Another possible explanation is that the whole Jacko story was dreamed up as a hoax by a newspaper in order to sell newspapers. Apparently this used to happen, and we know what happens today in the case of tabloids, and it certainly is a reason why many scientists refuse to take the Sasquatch seriously.
Then there's the story of the Minnesota Iceman. In 1968, the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained inspected what appeared to be a fresh corpse of a large, fully haired bipedal primate preserved in ice. The owner of this specimen said it had been found floating somewhere off the coast of Siberia. Seeing an opportunity for profit, he exhibited the specimen in carnival sideshows.